All right. So welcome back to the first ever Coaches Road conference. Our next presenters already waiting here, Heather Mannix. We had her on a podcast as well to speak a little bit about fun maps. And you have been, we know we're excited to hear the progress you have been making. And first of all, Heather, thanks a ton for making the time and joining us here today. And we are really excited to hear what you have to present.
Thank you, Rick. And I'm very excited to be here as well, and very happy that you guys asked me to come on. So I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into what Anders had actually started to talk about, which is that fun map study. So just a little bit of a background. I was able to get my master's at the George Washington University and work with Dr. Amanda Visick, who is now currently over in Sweden working with the Swedish Ice Hockey Federation, which is pretty exciting to hear some data coming from an international source now. When I worked with her, we were able to publish several scientific journal articles on this study here. So we had about 3 of them, and we did a youth sports psychology textbook chapter as well. And obviously working with the Swedish Ice Hockey Federation has been a lot of fun, and I think starting to put forth some new data on this study, which is really exciting. When I started working for USA Hockey, we actually integrated this study into our American development model. And so what was really kind of cool and very important about this study is that before this was done, we really didn't have an operational definition of what makes playing sports fun for kids. And so the big question was, what is fun? And what we knew from data already published was that it's the #1 reason why kids play sports across the board, which makes sense, right? If it's fun, kids are going to want to keep playing. And the absence of fun is the #1 reason why they cite when they drop out of sports. But what is fun? And this was a really important question, because without this operational definition, we kind of had to rely on our past experiences. And really what it came down to is, you know, when you're having it, you definitely know when you're not having it, but how do we create this experience for our kids? Because what we do know is that it is critical for athlete development as well. And so I know whenever I give this presentation, or whenever we really start to talk about fun and the importance of fun, especially in the elite performance pathways, we always have a little bit of fear as adults. If we just let our kids just go out there and have fun, we're going to get this kid or these kids or this kid here. And we can't just let our kids just go out there and have fun, because this isn't going to help them become better athletes. This isn't going to help me as a coach win more games. We can't just let them go out there and have fun. And one of the reasons, there's several reasons why we as adults think this way, is there's a lot of common misconceptions around this 3-letter word. One of the big myths is that it's synonymous with goofing off, or it's really important for the little kids to have fun. But once we get to a certain level and a certain age, then it's not about fun anymore, and it's about hard work. And that's another one of the reasons, is that we kind of think that fun is mutually exclusive from athlete development. Right? So if they're on the elite performance pathway, they have to work really, really hard, right? And if they're working really, really hard, they're probably not having fun. And if they're out there having fun, they're probably not working as hard as they could be. So when we as adults start to think about how fun is mutually exclusive from elite performance, that's where this big disconnect comes in. And that's where we try to minimize that. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll start to see what fun can look like and how it relates to development as well. So how exactly do you define fun? That was the big question. And youth sports and sports in general, it's unique in the sense that we as adults are responsible, and we as coaches are responsible for creating this environment for our players. But how often do we actually just ask them what they want out of the experience? And so when Amanda designed this study, that was how she designed it. So we went out into the field, and we asked players, parents, and coaches to finish this sentence stem here. So one thing that makes playing sports fun for players is, we said, just list everything that you can think of. And as Anders mentioned, this was done with American kids, and we took it from a soccer population. However, in order to make sure that this wasn't soccer specific data, we asked the kids, how many of you played more than one team sport? And over 75% of the kids in the study played more than one team sport. So we said, great, when you start listing these things off, think about when you're playing soccer, American soccer, football, and lacrosse, hockey, all of the sports that you play, and list everything that makes those sports fun. And so what we found was we were kind of blown away by how many answers they came up with. But we did find that talking and goofing off with teammates is absolutely a part of fun. Winning is absolutely a part of fun. But what we were kind of blown away is that they identified 81 specific actions and behaviors that define this 3-letter word. And so when we think about what makes playing sports fun for kids, you may see some things on the screen that maybe you didn't think or correlate with this is fun for them, or this is something that they would say is fun. Some things like working hard and trying hard, competing, right? Scrimmaging during practices, all of these things, they contribute to the overall fun experience for our players. And so what we found was that after they identified all of these 81 things, we actually went back out into the community and had them organize them in a way that made sense to them. And what we started to see is that there were 4 sources of fun coming out of this data. So we had our context-specific factors of fun, which are games in our practices. We had the internal sources of fun. So this is where that internal motivation and that drive to continue to work hard and be better comes from. So trying hard, learning and improving, and mental bonuses. You have the social sources of fun, which are positive team dynamics, team friendships, and team rituals. And then our external sources of fun, where we have positive coaching, game time support, and swag that all makes up that experience. And so if we take a deeper dive into those 4 sources and those 11 factors, what we had them do is we had them rate all of the 81 determinants on a scale from 1 to 5. How important is each one of these things relative to all of the other ones, right? So we had 81 actions and behaviors that made playing sports fun. However, they can't all be the most important to fun, right? Some are going to be very important, some are going to be less important. So we wanted to understand where our kids place that importance level, so we as adults knew where to focus our attention and allocate our resources to make sure that we were providing that environment for them. And what we found was that trying hard was the the most important factor when it came to playing sports fun, followed by positive team dynamics, positive coaching, learning and improving, games and practices. But if we look at, again, highlighting some of the things that we as adults don't typically associate with fun, trying hard or trying your best, working hard, competing, being challenged to improve and get better at your sport, learning from mistakes. So these are all things that kids are identifying as, or that we know is not only a part of their fun experience now, but these are all things that are critical for athlete development. And so as we continued on, we had team friendships followed by mental bonuses, game time support, team rituals, and swag. And all of these 11 fun factors make up the fun maps. And so this is something that as coaches, we can use now as a framework or a foundation of creating this fun, positive sport experience, knowing that if we can do that, we are going to impact our athletes' development as well. So when we took away all of the factors, so all of the ways that they categorized the 81 determinants, and we just ranked them 1 through 81, what we found was that the top 20, you'll notice that there's one that's particularly, we get a lot of surprise looks when we see that it's not in the top 20, which is winning. And so this is something that's pretty important to point out, is that winning is absolutely an important part of fun. It's way more fun to win than it is to lose. But when we look at what the top 20 fun determinants are, these are all process-oriented actions and behaviors. Winning, in fact, is one of the few outcome-oriented determinants that create this fun experience. So for us as coaches, this is kind of a good thing, because these are all things that we can have control over. We have control over the process. We don't have control over the outcomes. And so if we focus on creating this positive environment that challenges our players, that allows them to compete and play and try hard and work hard, we're not only going to be creating a more fun experience for them, we're not only going to be getting more out of our athletes, but we're also going to likely set ourselves up for success when it comes to creating the outcomes that we actually want. Of girls and boys, of kids that played recreational level and more elite travel level sports, and then also younger kids, which was U9 to U13, and older kids, which was grouped into U14 to U19. And the reason why we wanted to make sure we had equal representation from these subgroups is we wanted to make comparisons to see, are there differences between boys and girls? Are there differences between kids that are playing more recreational level versus a more competitive level? And what are the differences between younger kids and older kids? What we found was that kids are way more similar than they are different. And in fact, every time that we split up those subgroups and we compared them, we found that there are 3 tiers of importance when we looked at the groupings. And so no matter if you're coaching girls or boys, kids that play rec, kids that play travel, younger kids or older kids, trying hard, positive team dynamics, and positive coaching remained the top 3 most important factors in all of these subgroups. And so what's important to point out is that things like trying hard might look a little bit different, with younger kids versus older kids, right? So trying hard on the ice with a group of 8-year-olds might be trying really hard as a shark or as a minnow to get away from the shark. Whereas for older kids, it might be a battle drill in the corner, right? So the environment might look a little bit different, but the underlying principles remain the same. Kids want an environment where they can compete and they can play, because that's what makes this fun for them. So our young athletes are way more similar than they are different when it comes to their fun priorities. And what we did start to notice when we compared what coaches believed was the most fun for their players versus what the players were telling us, that's where we started to see a disconnect, and specifically at the older levels, which again kind of makes sense because we as adults think that fun is very important for younger kids. But once we reach that certain level, then it can't be about fun and it has to be about work. What's important is for us to understand as coaches that if we can create an environment where it is fun to work, then we're hitting all of the marks, right? And so what we're going to do now is I'm just going to show you a couple of real life examples. Amanda and I put these together probably a couple of years ago, and just started to look at some real life examples, and then looking at trying hard, the determinants within trying hard and learning and improving, because we know that those 2 are probably the most impactful factors and the determinants within those factors when it comes to actually athlete development. And so this is something, as an ADM manager with USA Hockey, I travel all over the United States and I work with different associations and teams. And so I see a lot of different practices. And this is a drill that something that I went through when I played, when I was a young coach. I did drills like this, but these are something when we look at what is the environment that we're creating for our kids. And when we think about trying hard as the most important, our kids are telling us that trying hard is the most important factor. But when coaches rated that, they thought that it was the 6th most important factor. And so this is where that big disconnect comes into play. And so when we are, as coaches, creating the environment, it's really important about how we create the environment. This instance is the very common drill we see in the US, stops and starts on the dot. So coaches are using, are working on stops, starts, transitions. I hear sometimes in the field people say, well, this is how we condition our athletes. But when we look at the level of effort that's coming out of a drill like this, if kids are actually giving effort in this environment, it's coming from an external source, right? They don't want to get yelled at. They don't want to get screamed at. They don't want to get chased by the coach banging their stick on the ice, trying to get them to skate faster. But there really isn't a whole lot in here in this drill and in this environment that we've created for our players that incentivizes giving effort. And so when we look at the determinants that this environment is fostering, well, they're exercising and getting active. They're getting in and staying in shape, maybe if to tax their cardiovascular system. But at the end of the day, the environment really hasn't incentivized actually competing and working hard. If you compare that to an environment like this, right, where it's much more game-like. This is a partner drill. We call it trucks and trailers, but it's really just a one-on-one, and a bunch of people are doing one-on-ones in this in the zone. And I was at both of these practices, and I can tell you that these girls were having way more fun, but they're still working on the exact same things that the previous example did, right? Stops, starts, transitions, but now we have puck protection, keeping your head up, right? But they're competing, they're playing a game, and they're having fun. Their effort is much higher, and it's intrinsically motivated. So when we look at, again, the fun determinants that are being fostered and facilitated in this environment, we're hitting way more of them than in the previous example. Another example here is this is something that we see all the time. We have trying to work on our breakout. We start with our 5-on-0 breakouts. Again, anytime we have practices and drills where we have predetermined paths, we've already taken away a lot of the decision making. And what tends to happen is that kids just go through the motions. So this might be, considered a warm-up drill, but again, if you watch their effort, it's not really very high. We can say from a fun determinant level, they're moving, they're exercising and getting in shape, maybe, but there are so many other ways that we can better work on these things in a much more fun and effective environment. And so with USA Hockey, we have our 5 essential elements of a good practice design. And obviously, fun is the most important, in my mind at least, because when we look at the other 4 and we think back to the research that has been done, all of these other 4, if you've created an environment where your kids have this constant decision making, right? You're challenging your players. So you heard Tobias talking about keeping that bar high, right? So we're challenging every single one of our players. We have those high expectations from them, but we put them in an environment that looks like the game. So they're competing, they're getting those repetitions without repetitiveness. If you create an environment with all 4 of those things, kids are going to be having fun, because what we know is that all of those things are components of fun. And so when we think about athlete development and creating and drill design and creating that environment for our athletes, if we can include all 5 of these things, they're not only going to be having a fun experience, but they're going to be developing at a higher level because their effort is going to be much higher as well. And so when we look at that comparison between the 5-on-0 breakout and something like this was when our Finnish friends were in town. If you look at this simple drill, and you can start to identify the 5 elements within a drill like this, but you're also working on components of a breakout, right? So this is a continuous 2v1 to a 2v3, right? So back and forth. What we do know is that learning and development, it's messy. And so what you'll notice in this example is the effort's a bit higher, but also it's going to be messier. So mistakes will be made. But when we think about what our players need in order to be able to break out, we've put them in a much more realistic environment. And at the end of the day, they're playing. They're playing in this environment. They're having way more fun than going through the motions of a 5-on-0 breakout. So hopefully one of the big takeaways here, I threw a lot at you in a short period of time, but at the end of the day, fun is development. When we look at how kids operationally define fun, they identified all of the key components of development. But it's our responsibility as coaches to do development right. And if we do development right, development is fun. These two things go hand in hand. They are no longer mutually exclusive, nor should they be viewed as that. So if you'd like to join the conversation, if you take a picture of that QR code, you'll get to a webinar that Amanda did for us at USA Hockey. Any new information, we usually throw it up on Twitter using those hashtags, and this is my information as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
I encourage to reach out to you or to Amanda if you have any questions, because this is an excellent ongoing project, and I also highly recommend to watch the webinar with Amanda, because I did it by myself, and a lot of valuable information. And Heather, again, thanks a ton for presenting this here today and for keep pushing this idea about fun. It has been changing my views on fun as well, and has been a big help for my coaching as well. So thanks a ton for this work.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.